we just seen the big cloud outage that happened with Amazon. And to be honest, I was just really keen to get your take on what resilience means in a cloud world. Obviously, we've seen a big provider like that go down, and practically all the systems I was trying to get on, I wasn't able to. So I'm keen to kind of understand what your take is on resilience and how organizations can build that.
Well, I guess resiliency isn't kind of it's not like never failing. It's having an outcome based or off the back of when something goes wrong. So look at AWS when they had a bad day in certain regions. Resiliency is making sure that you're not relying on one particular region. You've got something else at play that can take over if things don't go to plan on some of the dependencies or the paths between you and whatever you're trying to get to. So AWS, for example, the region that went down had a large part in the world to do with authentication, identity management and authentication. So that's why it had such a catastrophic effect, I guess, across the globe.
Do you know when people talk about they talk around resilience, and I hear that kind of used interchangeably with redundancy. What's the difference between the two, and kind of which one failed this week with that cloud outage that we've seen?
So I always look at it as redundancy as your spare parts. So that's what you've got if the main systems go down, and then resiliency is kind of surviving failure of one or two of those components in the main primary function of a service. So you it's kind of having diversity. So the way to sort of architect real resilience is to make sure that you know all the paths from cradle to grave where you're going to and from, and obviously all the systems that you connect to, making sure that you've got diversity between all of those. So you've got server A, server B. You've got resilient links in terms of maybe supplier resiliency, one from one provider, one from the other, from different pots, all of that type of stuff. That gives you that resilience. And then the redundancy is when all else fails. So, for example, you can have local redundancy on your site. For example, if a cloud service went down, that would be a redundant service ready to run.
Right. Okay. And so kind of would most organizations already have that? Because we've seen a big failure in one cloud region recently caused so many problems for so many systems across the world. Like, how did that happen? Would you think that most organizations have this redundancy or resilience, or would you say that they didn't and it kind of showed that?
I think if you spoke to them before this week, they would have
Yeah.
said yes. And then like this week, it clearly was there was some hidden impacts. So there's hidden dependencies, is I guess where I would word it. So it a lot of people would have said, yes, I'm on AWS. Yes, I'm on Azure. I've got fully resilient services. They're across EMEA, APAC, USA, whatever that might be. But what they didn't necessarily take into account is that maybe the authentication for those services was dependent on the region that had the issue, and then that causes a knock-on effect. So the underlying service might not have gone down, but the way to get into it had. So, I mean, to answer your question, I don't think everybody is fully aware of where the services go from and to in terms of cradle to grave, and that's the beauty of, I guess, AWS and Azure. They kind of keep things to themselves in some ways. They give you a region, and then you're tied to that region, but not necessarily knowing where the wires are between them. But yeah, I think it's opened eyes this week, especially with customers and what we see online as well. We've seen that they're looking now at whether they are resilient. So the answer is no, I guess. Nobody really. I guess everybody thought they were resilient, but the answer is, they're not. So
Interesting.
time to
And
review.
and you're talking a lot around understanding things from cradle to grave and kind of understanding which regions things are in and understanding kind of the whole ecosystem and how it all fits together and where you are in that. Is that something you'd advise organizations to currently take stock of and start doing if they're not already?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is where, born out of acquisition with Fortinet, we now have a Fortinet Connect network, so we can quite literally between customers and between sites, we can walk the path from our data centers into the customer data centers. We could tell you exactly which points are where, so then you can look at the pinch points. And that's the key piece, right? If you've got a service that needs 5 or 6 nines, you need to understand where the pinch points are. And if you might be having 2 circuits delivered to your premise, but in actual fact, if maybe 2 or 3 hops down the line, virtual hops, they are in one data center, then that is a single point of failure. And if that data center or region has an issue, you're going to have both of those circuits offline. So that's where, with any new networks that we put in there, if resiliency is key.
Right. So I work a lot in Welsh public sector, and most of the organisations I work with have a cloud first strategy all across everything they do. And obviously, there's a lot of benefits to having a cloud first strategy or trying to deliver all your services within the cloud. But how do we balance that with resilience as well?
It's a really good question. In fairness, the key thing is what you just said was cloud first, not necessarily cloud only. So we're seeing a lot of that in the certainly around government as well. Is that they say cloud first, but what they mean is cloud only, and that's not necessarily the way to look at it. You need to look at it how you can have all of your systems available 100% of the time, right? So go with cloud first, look at putting things in hyperscalers, but of course make sure that you account for the days like earlier this week with AWS, where we've got resilient layers to that, and even some redundancy where you've got potentially on-site resource just to keep the lights on if things go completely wrong. And that's kind of where from a Fortinet perspective, we have our own data centers. So we do rely on some of the hyperscalers for some of the services that we need or provide to customers, but we haven't got a sole reliance on those services. We've got our own data centers with our own network, as I discussed before, that then allows us to walk the path, understand where we are from cradle to grave from between us and a customer. And then also, if we are leveraging services in Azure, AWS or Google, for example, we've got ways and means to run those services on our own cloud as well if things go wrong.
It's almost not having a single dependency on one cloud provider, spreading that and kind of changing your strategy, so you're not going to be hit so badly if there is an outage in one. You've got
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult because when you go to these providers like AWS and Azure, they want to keep you as a vendor lock-in. They want that scenario where you are stuck, or not stuck, that's probably the wrong word, but where you're in their services and it's very difficult to get out. Whereas you can, I mean, there's services that allow you to leverage AWS and Azure, and you can have the same services running, linking between the two, but of course they come at an expense. But yeah, exactly that. But it's not just knowing that you are with AWS, you're in the EMEA region, therefore there are many data centers, 4 or 5 data centers in that region, therefore you're fully resilient. That's not the case, as we saw earlier this week. So little did people know, and we saw it out in the open, that there were services that were out of the UK, but they had identity services that were clearly using the US East data center that had the issue. And people were unable to access the services. The underlying service was absolutely fine if they could get past that login prompt, but they couldn't in this scenario because there was some issues there over in US East. So yeah, it's about knowing what regions you're in, and then also what regions you rely on. So you might be in the EMEA, but you might rely on the APAC region, for example. Although the data might not be passing there in terms of GDPR and compliance regulation side of things, it more than likely will rely on it at some point somewhere down the chain.
Okay, interesting. So probably just one last question for you. It's been great having a quick call. If you could give anyone just one piece of advice after the outages has happened this week, or when this goes live, probably last week, what would that one piece of advice be, and what would you say to do differently now?
I mean, the obvious. It sounds obvious saying it now, but don't just assume that the cloud won't have a wobble, right? I mean, the cloud is just a glorified data center in somebody else's zone, So it's a data center somewhere else. They call it the cloud, right? Just assume that it will have a bad day and it will have a wobble and it will have dependencies on things that you don't necessarily know about.
Yeah.
And therefore plan for it. So that's the key piece. So whether that's tabletop, whether that's going through all of your dependency mapping process again and understanding what you've got in between you and the end service, or even what the end service relies on, just run through that and see what you've got, and then start to look at drills and playbooks and automation to keep resilience alive, and monitoring, of course, making sure that you can monitor what's going on in your environment as well. But plan for it. That's the key. It doesn't necessarily mean you take it down and affect the users, but just tabletop. Yeah, run through it. Run through what your dependencies are.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's been great
Nice.
chatting to you.
Yeah, no problem at
Cheers.
all.